Greetings everyone! I'm doing some unpopular horror opinions today, and so people have asked me for worst of lists, like my top 10 worst books of the year and things like that. And I am never going to do a top 10 worst books of the year list. I'm just not going to, because while I do try to be fair and positive in my reviews, I am honest. So if I don't like a book, I will say why I didn't like it. But I'm not slating anyone that does make these lists. They're really popular. People love to see them, and in fact I watch them. I have creators that I've got opposite horror taste to, so I wait for their top 10 worst books of the year to come out, and then I put all of those books on my Amazon wish list. So, you know, authors do get sales out of things like this, but I can't bring myself to do it. I can't do it. But I thought maybe I'd dip my toes in the more negative pool and tell you some of my unpopular horror opinions, because I do think some of these are going to pee people right off, but I've started with the least offensive and we're going to work up. So number one is, I think that we need to bin the term elevated horror. So for people who aren't familiar with the term, or they don't know what fits into it, this is a category, a subgenre of films in particular, or I guess you could throw elevated horror into books as well. But so films like Hereditary, The Witch, Longlegs, stuff like that, Suspiria, those would go into the elevated horror category. And while this is my favourite category of horror films, like I've really just been eating all of this stuff up the last few years. I'm happy to see it's always existed. It used to be called art house cinema though. So this has always been my preferred subgenre of horror. I find it really interesting, and I love the work that's coming out now from Robert Eggers and Ari Aster especially. But I don't like the term, because the word elevated implies higher than, better than, and I think the implication is that this subgenre of horror is somehow superior to every other subgenre, like the slasher genre or whatever, or, you know, the supernatural, vampires and things like that. Although, you know, you could get vampires in elevated horror, whatever. And I think that because the term implies that, there's a further implication that the people who enjoy these kinds of films and the people who make them think that they're somehow superior to fans of other subgenres. And I feel like it's just a bit like divisive of a term, and I think that it's been coined for awarding bodies, because horror has always been overlooked or outright snubbed. I don't think anyone in the horror world will ever get over that Toni Collette didn't even get nominated for the Oscar for Best Performance for Hereditary. That was one of the best performances that have ever been put to screen. But anyway, and when people do tend to get nominated or they win for a horror film, for any category, performance or writing, wherever, it tends to get like rebranded. So Misery, to this day I've seen it marketed as a thriller, and it really annoys me. And I think it's because Kathy Bates won the Best Performance Oscar, and then they just thought, oh, we can't have the Academy recognizing that horror has any merit, so out it goes. So yeah, I just feel like the term is a bit of a barrier that's gonna create like some antagonism between horror fans, and it's unnecessary. I don't know what we should call it instead. I know that every subgenre has got its label and it's for marketing. You group things together and know what you're watching and everything. I just don't like the wording of it. Number two, Stephen King is not overrated. I keep seeing, it feels like it's trendy these days to say that Stephen King is overrated, grossly overrated. And I think that if you don't like Stephen King, that's absolutely fine. Not everyone is gonna love his writing, and I know a lot of the people that don't enjoy his stories often complain about things like the way that he meanders into like these character backstories that don't actually have any relevance to the plot. I would argue, I actually really like those sections of his books, and I would argue that everything that's character related is relevant to the plot, because everything informs how the people in his stories are handling their situations and stuff. But I'm a really character-centric reader. I enjoy stories about people, and I'm less for the actual plot most of the time. I'm way more connected to character than anything else. So for my preferences, I think he's great. I think that maybe I think that maybe people are, I think there's like a rise of this like Stephen King is overrated thing, because the bookish review spaces, especially on TikTok, are dominated by people in their 20s, early 20s, people who are discovering him for the first time now. And because he's got such an enormous body of work, I think that I think your entry point into Stephen King's work is going to really influence how you feel about him in general. So I discovered him when I was 12 in the 90s, when certain terms and words and things were not deemed unacceptable yet. So like I had less of a reaction to some of the like the more uncomfortable language that's in his earlier work than people would now, because people are just woken up a lot more to things like that now. So I completely understand why younger people discovering him now, especially if they're starting on his earlier work, might be a bit like, what? But it's very contextual. But I just find it nuts that people are saying he's overrated, when the reason that he is so successful, he's one of the most successful authors that's ever lived. He's like 80 books in. I've read everything that he's written to date, and I think that the reason he is not overrated is because for the most part, and obviously not everyone's going to like him, but his writing is very accessible. He's not sort of in like the literary category of writers where he's not, you know, overly descriptive and verbose and things. He doesn't use very flowery language. He's very much writes like a working class person, and most of us are working class, and I just feel like, I don't know, I just feel like he's very honest in his depiction of characters, which is why people can relate to them so much. So I wholeheartedly disagree with that. Number 3, the best way to experience horror, a horror narrative, is through gaming. So I don't know if this is going to be like controversial at all, but I feel like my brother said this to me once, Gamer Goat Mikey. Oh, he composes music, by the way, and it's really good, and I'm going to put a link for his YouTube channel in the description. But yeah, he said this to me once, and it was the first time that I'd ever considered that, because when you're watching a horror film, it's a passive activity, even if you are really like enthralled with it and engrossed, but you're still like outside of the horror film, so you can be scared and everything, but you're not there. And it's the same when you read a book. You have to engage your imagination a little bit more, but you're an observer to the horror, whereas with a game, you are the protagonist and you're in the action. You have to make all of the decisions, and because of that, if you play a horror game, it's terrifying. I've been playing Dying Light 2, I've been playing a lot, and I'm not a very good gamer, so if you've played Dying Light 2, then you'll know that when nighttime comes and you get into a chase and you don't have many parkour skills yet, and the music is getting like scarier and scarier, and you can just hear doors flying open behind you and all of the screeching from the zombies, it's very scary. So I do think horror gaming is the best way to experience horror if you want to be scared. Number 4, this one winds me up a little bit. Shelley Duvall not only wasn't bad in The Shining, but she gave the standout performance. I am going to die on that hill. I think that she was the best actor in the cast. I think that she outacted Jack Nicholson. And even if people don't like Wendy as a character and they find her annoying, I will never, ever, ever understand why anyone ever criticised Shelley Duvall's performance, because oh, here's the thing as well. Sadly, Shelley Duvall is no longer with us as of recently. And I feel like because of her passing, people are now being much softer on their opinions of her performance. But for my whole life, since I first saw that film as a kid, I have heard people saying, oh, it's a good film, but Shelley Duvall's acting is terrible. And I just don't understand what everyone else is seeing that I'm not, because she is playing a wife of an abusive alcoholic with a history of violence towards her son, and probably her. It's not stated in the book, but we're in Jack's perspective, so maybe that's not something he feels bad about, as opposed to the incident with Danny. And then she's taken out of her home, she's supporting the dreams of her husband, and you would be on eggshells around a guy like that. And in the film, Jack is an asshole before he's even under the influence of the hotel. He's snippy with her in the car on the way there, and I just felt like Shelley Duvall was playing a woman who has resigned herself to have to live in a constant state of placating her husband, to not set him off. and then just try and keep her son happy. And you know, she's hanging out with Danny in the hotel, they're going around the hedge maze, she's having fun with him. She doesn't have any other adults to talk to because it's just the three of them there. And then supernatural stuff starts happening that she starts to realize, in conjunction with her husband getting very unpredictable and homicidal. And I thought that her portrayal of a woman that starts off looking a bit fragile in the first place, and she's a bit meek because she's had to, that's how she's surviving in her marriage, is pushed to the edges of her own sanity when all of this stuff starts happening to her. And she wasn't weak either. She might have sounded weak and she might have looked frightened, because who wouldn't be, but she still did knock him out with a bat, drag him into the storage thing. She made all of the smart decisions trying to get her and Danny out, and everything that, like, at every point that she was stopped, it wasn't because of a bad decision she made, it was because the hotel was working against her. So, and I just thought that Shelley Duvall's performance was incredible. I think that that's one of the best performances of a woman who's like already starting out anxious, getting, I don't know, I just felt like Jack Nicholson gets so much praise for his performance in this thing, and I just thought he started off unhinged and then just got louder. And I'm not slating Jack Nicholson, he's a great actor, but I just thought this particular performance wasn't his best one, and I don't understand how people are comparing the two and saying that she was over the top. Number 5, this is a bookish opinion, and it's about The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, and I'm going to have to talk about the ending, so if you haven't read it yet and you want to, please, I've time-stamped everything in the description, so please just jump ahead to the next section. And if you're listening to this while washing the dishes and you're scrabbling right now to try to get you to your phone, please enjoy this brief musical interlude while I give you a few seconds to skip ahead. Okay, ready? So the ending of The Cabin at the End of the World, I think, has been largely misunderstood, glossed over and completely overlooked. And I think that it's a perfect ending. And this is, see, I feel like people are sort of like one way or the other with Paul Tremblay's endings. Like, I really love them. I think he does great endings. And I know that I've seen other people review his books and say like they really liked the book, but not so much the ending. So I'm in the former camp. But I feel like people didn't get The Cabin at the End of the World. Like, I feel like the point was missed, and I'm not saying like, oh, I got the point and no one else did. I'm sure that lots of people got it and they just didn't like it, and that's fine. But for me, for my opinion, I think that this is the only way that this book could have ended, because so we've got our couple, I can never remember their names, and they're my favourite couple that have ever been in a story, but I can never remember their names. But their daughter, when they're holidaying in this cabin, 4 people turn up, very 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, telling them that the family have to sacrifice one of the 3 of them, and they have to decide who's going to die, otherwise the world's going to end. And so the whole book, you're going between like, are these people crazy, or are they actually doing, have they been sent here by God for this sacrifice or whatever? And I was hoping that the book was going to end on a firm, like, which camp are we in here? And it doesn't. But the reason it doesn't is because Wen dies, their daughter dies, and then what's left is our couple who are completely broken in the immediate aftermath of their kid's death. And I just feel like the point of this was that it's completely irrelevant whether the wider world is actually ending, because their world just ended. Their child's dead. So there's nothing worse that can happen to a parent, and the experience that they went through for that end result as well is so horrific that I just can't imagine that anyone could ever recover from that. So, and this book has been from the perspective of this family, so we're in their world for the whole time, not in the wider world, so it doesn't matter. If you've seen Knock at the Cabin, the M. Night Shyamalan film, it ends completely differently to the book. I feel like the film missed the point of the book as well, actually. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on The Cabin at the End of the World. I'm not saying that the people who didn't like it just didn't get it, but I think a lot of people didn't get it, so that's my thoughts on that. Number 6. Hear me out. The It miniseries from 1990, starring Tim Curry, is better than the newer films. And I've talked to people in real life about this, in day-to-day life, and they have wholeheartedly disagreed with me. But I have to tell you that as adaptations go, so It is my favourite Stephen King book. I have ranked all of Stephen King's books to date, by the way, and I'll put the link for that video in the description if you're interested. Did it in 20 minutes or less. I was very impressed with myself. But anyway, It is my favourite Stephen King book, and it's because of the group of kids, the 7 kids that call themselves the Losers Club, and their bond and their relationship and their friendship with each other. And despite the horrible things going on in it, I feel like it's very wholesome, and that's why I love it so much, I think. And the original mini-series, now I'm not saying there are no problems with it. There's loads of stuff wrong with it, you know, you can laugh about loads of stuff, but I felt like the friendship between all of those kids felt really, really authentic, and I thought the casting was good. There's some like cheesy stuff, like Richie's a little bit over the top, but I know people like Richie. I knew people like him then, and I still know them as adults now. I believed them. I believed that they all really loved each other and that they would die for each other. And then in the newer versions, I think that the casting was great, but it just felt like something was missing. I felt, for me, like whether I was going to love those films and feel really invested was very entirely hinged on like the chemistry between the kid characters. I thought that Eddie and Richie were standouts. I loved their relationship in the new one. I thought that they absolutely nailed that. But just generally speaking, I don't know, like Bill in the original felt like a leader, felt like someone with really high emotional stakes and a vendetta. Whereas I kind of didn't get that from this version. And also I feel like, as much I really, really loved Bill Skarsgård's portrayal of Pennywise, but I feel like they put too much emphasis on Scary Clown in the new ones. I feel like anytime Bill was on screen, he was a scene stealer. He was so good, and some of the scary scenes were really good with him. But I think that they just took Scary Clown around with it, because in the book and the miniseries, it appears to the kids as a clown to sort of disarm them, have them like get their guard down, and then when they kind of like in his clutches, then he becomes the nightmare thing that scares them to death. When they can't really get away. And I know people are gonna point out with the miniseries that he kind of just scares them and doesn't do anything, which is true. But in the new film, he appears as the terrifying thing first, and then becomes the clown after he doesn't get them. So now they know that the clown is the evil, and I was like, this is the backwards way around to do. Like, why would this doesn't make any sense to me. It was for the sake of having as much clown in the film as possible, I think. I don't know, it was odd. Also, I can't believe that in this day and age this happened. And I'm really sorry if I know there's criticism about people that aren't from certain demographics getting like all high horsey about things, so like please in the comments let me know if I'm off base. But first of all, I really didn't like some of the decisions they made about Beverly in the new film, because originally Beverly saves the boys. She's probably emotionally the strongest person in the group. She's not like a damsel. She's been forged by the home life she has. She's really strong. And then in this film, she's like kind of sassy and cool, but ultimately she becomes a damsel in distress, and all the boys have got to go and rescue her, and it really pissed me off. Why did they do that with the only female character? And there are male characters in that group that are way more susceptible than her to the influences. I just didn't understand what they were doing with that. And then the other thing that I really didn't like, and I'm not the only person who's complained about this, there's one black character, Mike, and originally he's the guy that's like the historian, he knows all the history. He's the one who's like piecing things together and telling the group about everything. He's like the most intellectual one. And then in the new version, they took that role off him, gave it to Ben, and instead gave Mike a bolt gun, and that was his role in the group. I was so pissed off when I realised that Ben, I was like, why has Ben got the history books? and then I was like, wait, where's Mike? And I can't believe that happened in this last decade, with everything that people know and everything that people have learned and how liberal Hollywood apparently is, that when you actually have an opportunity with a story that does have a little bit of diversity in the casting, that's what you decide to do with those characters. Next. Now, this is the reason I'm bringing this up, because this franchise is not horror, even though it contains vampires and werewolves. I think you know what I'm going to start talking about. It's not horror, it's sort of paranormal, supernatural YA romance. However, the criticisms come from the horror community at large. And I am, of course, talking about Twilight, and the unpopular opinion I have is that Stephenie Meyer did not ruin vampires and werewolves, and in fact, I think that she has received a disproportionate amount of hate about what she did with these supernatural creatures, because, quite honestly, she didn't really do anything. And I think that because it's so fashionable to hate on Twilight, as I do, I've done it several times myself, but because it's such a fun thing to hate and a fun thing to talk about disparagingly, I think that Stephenie Meyer has received sort of some undue criticism about elements like that, to be honest, it's undeserving. So things that Stephenie Meyer should be criticised for. The imprinting thing with the werewolves, like what was she thinking with that? Like, and I don't know what possessed me recently. I saw a reel of Jacob imprinting on the baby, and for some reason I felt the need to reply to people's comments on it, and the comments I replied to were things like, oh, what a lovely moment, and I don't know why, I must have been in a bad mood. I just felt the need to rain on people's parade with how creepy that is. And I could see people arguing, it's not creepy, it's explicitly stated in the books that imprinting can be platonic, and blah, 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 blah. Now, it might be explicitly stated in the books, but we're talking about the films, and you shouldn't have to have a background knowledge of a book to get the full context for a film. The film is supposed to do that for you. And in the films, there are no examples of platonic imprinting at all, not a single one. All of the imprinting that's discussed or that we see, they are romantic relationships, and it's a baby, and even if Jacob doesn't fancy the baby as a baby, we know that they get together eventually because Alice sees it in a vision and she's smiling about it, and I'm like, but in any other context this is grooming. Also, Jacob towards the end of the last film makes a comment to Edward, a joke in fact, and he says something like, oh, should I start calling you dad, when Renesmee still looks about 7 years old. There's no other way to spin that other than Jacob isn't currently interested. I think that people just don't want to see it because they don't want their favourite stuff ruined for them. But unfortunately, as is the case with a lot of stuff aimed at a YA female audience, there's massive problems with the male characters. What I think that's... Oh, also, there's a deleted scene, if you don't know. If you're a Twilight fan, you don't know. There's a deleted scene where Edward first hears the thought that Jacob has imprinted on the baby and he breaks his arm. Now you tell me why any dad would do that if it was as pure and innocent as Jacob is saying. Stuff that Stephenie Meyer, I think, has been unfairly criticised for. Creepy age gap with the romance. I'm sorry, Buffy and Angel, the Salvatores from the Vampire Diaries, basically any vampire fiction that's ever existed that's aimed at teenage girls has got these gross, creepy age differences, and Stephenie Meyer is being slated as if she's the first person to ever think of this, when actually she's just followed what's been popular for decades. Secondly, the vampire sparkling, it is stupid in the film, it is stupid, but it's not her doing in the film. It's not Stephenie Meyer's fault that whoever was in charge of the sound design or the director or whatever decided, oh, not only are we going to have them sparkle like they're made of diamante crystals, but we're going to put a weird little sparkly sound effect that makes it sound twinkly like they're a fairy. or some sort of like magical little imp. That's not on Stephenie Meyer. That was a production decision for the film. In the book, they're described as having sort of like diamond-like texture skin, and they do sparkle in the sunlight. But when I read it, it was before the film had come out, and I didn't really think anything of it. I read it and thought, oh, okay. The film is what made it stupid. Third, she hasn't, apart from that, she didn't do anything new with vampire lore, and I don't understand why people are saying, oh, she ruined vampires, because she hasn't done anything that's out of the ordinary apart from the sparkling thing. We have other vampire fiction, again, Vampire Diaries, where people are walking, you know, they're walking around in the sunlight. There's always a witch that can make a ring, and the Salvatores are just walking around in the sunlight, so that's been done. Romances, obviously covered that. Vampires who are vegetarian, that hate their existence and they're brooding. Hello Anne Rice. You know, this isn't, so how did she ruin vampires? I don't understand. So while I agree that there's loads to criticize about Twilight, and I am a enthusiastic criticizer of Twilight, I don't think that this she ruined vampires thing is fair at all. We're on the last three now, and I'm going to say this to you: of all genres, I think that horror is the most feminist, and I think that that's why I like it so much. So horror as a genre is very looked down upon by the wider world of entertainment. I didn't notice it. I didn't even know that until like maybe 10 years ago, when I hosted a Halloween quiz and everyone complained that my questions were too hard and obscure, and I thought I'd done an easy quiz where I'd asked general knowledge questions, and that was when I realized that horror, as popular as it is niche compared to everything else. And a criticism I hear very often from people who are mostly outside the horror genre, that don't read it, that don't watch it, that don't enjoy it, or don't know anything about it, always claim that it's anti-feminist, that it's woman-hating, that it's really sexist, that it's just full of masked men slaughtering women and whatever. And yes, while there are problems with the horror genre, especially if we're going back a couple of decades, you know, if a woman got her boobs out, she was dead. But I think that people are specifically talking about the slasher genre when they make those criticisms, and also I don't think that all those criticisms are valid, because the slasher genre is full of, yes, male slashers typically speaking, in most cases, but they are killing women and men indiscriminately. I find like the body count's going to be high. In fact, usually more men are killed than women, and that is because of the imbalance with casting. There's usually more men in a film than women in general, and that goes for all genres. But the final girl trope exists, and the final, like, it's a trope because it's been done over and over in horror, where the survivor that comes out of the ordeal is a woman who outthought the killer, you know, outwitted everybody, made smart decisions, maybe other people weren't listening to them. And I could probably list 15 final girls just off the top of my head without even thinking about it. But then when I think about other genres, and I'll admit I don't read a lot in other genres, but I do watch a lot of different films, and I can't name 15 really strong leading women from any other film genre off the top of my head without having to really think about it. You name me 10 to 15 action stars, not, you know, side characters, I mean protagonists, so like 50, name me 15 female-led action films, full stop. Thrillers, anything that involves cops, they're usually men, and maybe their partner is a woman, but the man is usually the main one in any other genre. Comedies, dominated by men. There are more female-led comedies now, sure, but that's very recent. Romance, oh my god, the romance genre. So this is a genre of film and books, but in film, this is where the problem is. These films star women, are about women, are for women, marketed to women, and do you know how the percentage of female directors in the romance genre is the same as the percentage for horror? According to the statistics that the most recent ones I was able to find today, apparently it's about 16% female directors for romance films, about 16% for horror. So You tell me why a genre that's entirely hinging on female stories still has hardly any women involved in the production compared to the amount of men, and then tell me that the horror genre is a problem because it's sexist. So like, I know there are systemic problems, and I know there's still an imbalance. I'm not saying that horror is a 50-50 genre, and I'm not saying that there's no misogyny in it, but I just think that the horror genre getting that label over every other genre is so unfair. And in fact, I think I enjoy the horror genre more than anything else because I see more decent depictions of women in it. I didn't mean to get angry. Let's move on to one that you might get angry about. We got 2 left. Oh. The Dawn of the Dead remake by Zack Snyder is better than George A. Romero's original Dawn of the Dead. I can already hear people crying blasphemy, but I'm sorry, I just think it is. I think it's a better film because, and I would never normally say that about anything Zack Snyder's done, if I'm being completely honest with you. He's not my bag, generally speaking, but I love the original Dawn of the Dead, and I love George Romero, and I acknowledge everything he did. Like, he basically created and popularized this version of a zombie, like the undead shambling corpse. Like, that really wasn't a thing before George Romero came along with Night of the Living Dead. And Dawn of the Dead used to be my favorite of the original trilogy. I've actually moved over to Day of the Dead now for that. And I love it, and the setting is so much fun. Like, when I was a kid, I wanted to be in the mall fighting the zombies, and I used to think about how much fun it would be to like hold up in a mall and you've got all of this stuff at your disposal. Like, what a great place if you have to be in a zombie apocalypse to be secure. But I just thought that the remake upped the ante. I felt like it captured the spirit of the original. You know, all of the fun stuff that people like about the original is in there. You know, you've got this group in this mall, and you got chaos, you got zombies, but they're running zombies. They are just innately much more of a threat. The virus spreads much faster, so there's a much more direct threat to every single person in the group if they come into contact with anything. I don't know, I think it has one of the best horror movie intros of all time. When Louis, or is it Lewis, yeah, is bitten by the girl, and it just, I don't know, I think that maybe where the original is let down a little bit is that I think it was a little bit too long. They're in the mall for such a long time, and that although it is really great fun, I do think some of it could have been cut. So yeah, that's my thinking, and let's just move on to the last thing now. And I think that people might be even maybe more annoyed about this one because I have only met one other person that shares this opinion with me, and it's my husband. And we went to the cinema to see this film, and we both hated it. And in hindsight, I don't hate it, but I think that Talk to Me is really overrated, and I didn't like it. And I've been afraid to say it publicly because people get very heated about their film stuff. I didn't like it, and here's for why. Let me tell you for why. So, right, it has its merits. I'm not saying it's a terrible film. I just don't understand why everyone is putting this up on their favourite films of the year list for that year, because I think that the performances by the actors are really good. I thought that the cast was great. I got no qualms about their performances or anything. I think that there were some really my chair is just slowly turning. This is creepy. I thought that there were some like genuinely scary scenes, and I enjoyed those. And I thought that the actual hand, like the mechanism, the device that they were using to contact the dead, I thought that looked really cool. Like, what a great prop. Like, yeah, my chair is turning, but how? However, story-wise, for me, this film was basically just your cut and copy, like you sort of copy and paste Ouija board film where you contact the dead, you don't say goodbye properly, and now the thing is following you around. and you can't get rid of it, and maybe it's a demon and not just a ghost or whatever. And even though, you know, they used like the hand thing that you hold, sorry, I keep doing this, bro, the hand thing, instead of a Ouija board, it basically served the same purpose, just that like the only person who can like really communicate with the thing is the person holding the hand. But outside of that initial premise, this just followed the same plot that every Ouija board film has for me. So I don't know. And also, towards the end, people did start making stupid decisions that I couldn't get behind. That's the worst trope in horror for me, is just people making decisions they'd never make. And I do allow things for like people are panicking or emotional or whatever, but I don't know, I saw this, I was really disappointed with it because it's an A24 film and I love them, generally speaking. They haven't really let me down. And then I saw all of the hype about it and everyone just losing their minds about what an amazing one of the best films to come out in the last few decades. And I was just sat there like, is it outside of aesthetics? So anyway, those are some unpopular opinions, and you know, I don't know how unpopular they are or if you agree with me, but like, let me know in the comments your thoughts. I'd love to know what some of your unpopular opinions are, because as you know, I don't like to be negative and I hesitate to say things I think are going to be super controversial, although I have more controversial and popular opinions. So let me know if you want to see a video of that, but I just like to test the waters with this one. If you subscribe, I'll force Kaylee to watch the original Dawn of the Dead until she concedes a stupid point about this remake being superior. I'll see you tomorrow with a game video. We're doing Silent Hill 2 at the moment, so you know, if you're interested in seeing me freak out and panic and probably aim at the ceiling, that might be for you. Saturday I'll be back with another book video, and then on Sunday I'll see you with an author interview. Bleat!